Here at Family History Fanatics, we like user questions because there's many user questions that end up being great videos to help others understand what is going on. And today I have one that is rather interesting. And this is, could someone have all of the Neanderthal variants? Now, if you've tested at 23andMe, one of the things they do is tell you what Neanderthal variants you have. And that usually is somewhere around, 150 to maybe 400 variants? Not that much. For instance, I think I have like 270 and my wife has like 380 or something like that. I believe we have an aunt, her aunt, that has like 402. She's on the upper end of it. And if you have something like 400 variants, you actually have more than 99% of all the people who have tested on Ancestry. First, let's take a look at a quick graphic here. This is me, and these are the Neanderthal variants I have. Now, I know that the light blue doesn't show up as well on the white, but you can see that they are spread throughout my entire genome. Interestingly enough, on chromosome number 21 and my X and Y chromosome, I don't have any Neanderthal variants, but I have a Neanderthal variant on at least one of my chromosomes on every single other chromosome pair. Now, there's a total of 2,872 variants that they looked for. And this is, of course, divided up in pairs. So it's really, 1,436 different variants that could be on one or both of your chromosomes. If I have 250, 270 variants, I've got maybe 10% of all the possible variants. And if Devin's aunt has just over 400, well, that's still only about 15% of all the possible variants. And she has more variants than 99% of all the people on 23andMe that have tested. So how are these spread out? Well, you can see these are spread out throughout the entire chromosome. These are all the variants, except for on the X and the Y, which is interesting because that probably tells us a little bit about how the interbreeding with Neanderthals happened 30, 40, 50,000 years ago. In other words, it was only modern human X chromosomes and Y chromosomes that were passed down. No Neanderthal X and Y chromosomes have been passed down in modern humans that we know of. Right now, there's nobody that has all the variants. Like I said, if you have above 400, then you have more than just about anybody else. But this is a hypothetical. Could somebody have more? So we have to make some assumptions here and do this thought experiment to see whether or not it could happen. So my first assumption is that each of these variants came from a different Neanderthal. So 2,800, we'll just round up to 3,000 as we're talking. We need 3,000 Neanderthals that had one of these variants that passed that down. Okay, so with that assumption then, in order to inherit all of those variants, you have to be related to all of the Neanderthal forebears that modern humans have. Now that may seem like it's pretty much impossible, but let me tell you right now, that is actually the easy part of this thought experiment. Probably everybody who has ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa is related to all of our Neanderthal forebears. Why is that? Well, 40,000 years ago equals about 1,000 generations. And that's just to make math simple. I know that those numbers aren't exact, and it's probably actually even more generations, but 1,000 generations makes the math simple for us. If we do 2 to the 1,000, this is how many people we are related to at that time. You know, how many spots on our family tree we would have 1,000 generations ago. That is 1 times 10 to the 300. Now, for those of you who are astrophysicists, you know, deal with really large numbers or deal in the quantum world, particle physics, things like that, you'll probably know that 1 times 10 to the 300 is more electrons than there are in the universe. This is a huge, ginormous number. And of course, there weren't that many humans, so we don't have that many individual ancestors at that point in time. 40,000 years ago, the population of the entire world was probably only about 1 million or so. We had gone through a bottleneck about 70, 80,000 years ago where the modern human population was dwindled down to, I don't remember, 30,000 to maybe 100,000 people. So 40,000 people, if we just say that there was 1 million people, and you're related to every one of those through billions of different paths. So all 1 million of those, theoretically, are your ancestors, but they're your ancestors billions of times over, because that's what you need to get to that 1 times 10 to the 300. So being related to every single one of those Neanderthal ancestors is not a problem. It's actually very simple, simply because of how far back in time that is. So the next criteria then to get all of these variants is you have to have received the Neanderthal segment specific to each variant. So remember, each one of these Neanderthal forebears had that variant, that little segment that has that variant on it, and that has to be passed down to you. Now, if you think about how we have looked at different segments on this channel and how we've looked at how those are passed down, even just in, from parents to child to grandchild to great-grandchild, it's very easy to have segments be diminished, which brings us to this really big problem. And that big problem is related to the first problem. What made the first problem so easy, that really large number, is what makes the second problem such a big problem. And that is, we have to take the inverse of this, basically, to form our probability. Now, I know since you're going through it billions of times, you're actually dividing by billions, but this number is so large that it really doesn't matter. We have a tiny probability of receiving those segments from each one of those Neanderthal forebears. In other words, it's really more likely that you're going to win the Mega Millions jackpot 2,872 times in a row. Not over your lifetime, but in a row. Now, that would take probably 300 or 400 years for your streak to last. But if you can think about how unlikely it is to win the jackpot twice, then think about how unlikely it is then to win it 2,872 times in a row. And that is why you don't see anybody on Earth today that has tested their DNA that has every single one of these Neanderthal variants. Now, we could do another thought experiment about, well, okay, but could we help this along and get somebody who has all of these? Theoretically, you could. You'd have to test everybody, find out who has the most, and those people would have to have children. So you got some forced having children there, which is probably a little bit unethical. But they wouldn't be able to just have one child because, remember, with the randomness, they wouldn't necessarily inherit all of them. What we want is the outliers. So those people actually probably have to have 10 or 20 or 30 children together. And those children are tested to find out the one that is the big outlier that, let's say you put 400 people together and you find a child that has 450 or 500 of the variants. Well, now they're part of this, and you find another one that has 500, put them, and you keep on going with this where you can see that, yeah, it's not something that is going to happen naturally. And any kind of forcing this is going to be completely unethical. So I don't expect any test at any point in time ever to show all 2,872 variants. Additionally, over time, some of those variants are going to be lost. Some of them are probably rare, and as the people that have them don't necessarily have children of their own, or they don't pass on that segment to their children, then that variant may be lost. And so I'm confident in saying we're never going to see a single person with all of those variants. Now, if you'd like to learn something more about Neanderthal ancestry, then you can watch this video up at the top.